Back in the 1970s, dinner time wasn't just a part of the day. It was a ritual. A time when families gathered around laminate tables, the nightly news hummed in the background, and home-cooked meals stretched every dollar while feeding every belly. We will go back into America's past and look at 25 meals that weren't just nourishment. They were a window into the soul of 1970s America. 25. Country Captain. In kitchens from Savannah to Charleston, Country Captain wasn't just a meal. It was a story on a plate. A fusion of Southern soul food and Indian-inspired spice, this curried chicken dish took root in the American South and quietly made its way into homes across the country. At a time when curry powder was still something exotic found in the international aisle, Country Captain introduced American families to warm, fragrant flavors like turmeric, cumin, and ginger, without overwhelming the palate. The recipe was as forgiving as it was flavorful. Chicken pieces browned in a skillet, simmered with onions, bell peppers, raisins, and canned tomatoes, then ladled over fluffy white rice. It was the kind of dish you made on Sunday and reheated all week. Military mess halls also adopted it, especially near southern bases, making it a familiar taste for soldiers far from home. For many families, Country Captain wasn't just a meal. It was a way to feel connected to a broader world, even while sitting at the kitchen table under a buzzing fluorescent light. 24. Rice with soy sauce. In the 1970s, this wasn't just a dish, it was a cultural bridge. At first glance, it might seem too simple to warrant a mention, a bowl of plain white rice with a drizzle of soy sauce. But in homes across America, especially in urban neighborhoods where cultural cross-pollination was on the rise, it was everything. The dish reflected shifting demographics, the legacy of post-World War II Asian immigration, and America's growing palate for global flavors. Soy sauce began appearing on grocery store shelves thanks to brands like Kikkoman and La Choy. For working families with tight budgets and little time, rice became the perfect base. Cheap, versatile, and filling. Add soy sauce, and you had a meal that tasted like something more. Children of immigrant families often recall the comfort of this dish as a bridge between generations. Their parents might have eaten it with chopsticks, while the kids reached for a fork. But the taste was universal. A little salty, a little savory, and always satisfying. In an era when TV dinners were starting to dominate, rice with soy sauce stood as a reminder of tradition and simplicity. It wasn't flashy, but it was home. 23. Macaroni with butter and salt. Ask anyone who grew up in a 1970s household what comfort tasted like, and odds are they'll mention this dish. It wasn't fancy, it didn't need to be. A pot of macaroni noodles, a knob of butter, and a generous sprinkle of salt was enough to turn a hard day into a manageable one. This was the food of latchkey kids, tired parents, and tight budgets. You could have it ready in 10 minutes, no recipe required. Sometimes it was the only thing in the pantry. Other times it was a side dish upgraded with frozen peas or a dash of garlic powder. But no matter how it was served, it always brought comfort. This meal was eaten in front of black and white TVs and atop avocado green Formica countertops. It fed picky eaters and grandparents alike. And for many, it was their first attempt at cooking, standing on a step stool, stirring noodles with a wooden spoon taller than they were. It was cheap, it was filling, it was love made edible. 22. Beans on toast. Beans on toast was more than a dish. It was a declaration of practicality passed down from wartime habits and proudly embraced during the lean years of the 1970s. Imported from Britain and adopted in parts of the American South and Midwest, this simple meal often made an appearance at breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Canned baked beans, poured over toasted white bread, and maybe topped with a bit of cheddar or hot sauce, could stretch a grocery budget further than most meals. It was quick to prepare, filling and satisfying in its own humble way. For blue-collar families, this was a go-to when the paycheck hadn't yet arrived or when unexpected bills took priority over meat at the dinner table. There was something deeply human about it. No pretense, just practicality. The kind of meal served with love when there wasn't much else to give. It's a reminder that food doesn't have to be gourmet to be meaningful. 21. Hamburger gravy on bread. If you've never had hamburger gravy on bread, you've missed one of the most comforting and resourceful dishes from the 1970s playbook. It started with a pound of ground beef, one of the cheapest proteins around, browned in a skillet. To that, you added chopped onions, maybe some mushrooms if payday had been kind. Then came the magic. A roux made from beef fat and flour, stirred until thick and rich. A splash of milk or broth turned it into gravy, hearty and deeply savory. Poured over slices of white sandwich bread or day-old rolls, it became an instant meal. For many, it was also a Sunday night dinner tradition, helping families stretch leftovers while still ending the weekend with something warm and filling. For kids, it was comfort on a plate. For parents, it was a lifesaver when time and money were both in short supply. And like so many dishes of the era, it's mostly disappeared from today's menus, despite being just as satisfying now as it was then. 20. Pork neck bones with rice. Back in the 1970s, the best meals didn't come from the most expensive cuts. They came from the overlooked ones. Pork neck bones weren't pretty, they weren't tender, but for many families across the rural South and beyond, they were gold. Butchers often sold them for pennies a pound, and they were the kind of cut you slow-cooked all day, letting the bones work their magic in a bubbling pot. The meat, once tough, would fall off the bone and melt into a rich, flavorful broth that flavored rice like nothing else. You didn't need fancy seasoning, just thyme, a little salt, and maybe a bay leaf from the tin on the spice rack. For many American families, especially black families in the South, this dish wasn't just a budget meal. It was a cultural inheritance, born of necessity, passed down with pride, served with a side of greens or cornbread, pork neck bones with rice, reminded us that flavor doesn't come from a price tag. It comes from love, patience, and knowing how to make the most of what you've got. 19. Potted meat sandwiches. Canned goods were the unsung heroes of 1970s American kitchens, and potted meat was king of the shelf. Whether it came from Underwood or Libby's, this mysterious meat paste, salty, fatty, and oddly satisfying, was always ready when you needed it. Spread thick on white bread, sometimes with a dab of mustard or a few pickle slices, potted meat sandwiches were a lunchbox classic. They weren't fancy, they didn't need refrigeration, and they were a godsend for factory workers, school kids, and anyone on the go. In many homes, the potted meat can sat right next to the peanut butter, always there when grocery money ran short. It might raise eyebrows today, but for those who lived it, potted meat was the taste of practicality. The taste of a time when convenience didn't come with luxury branding, just a can opener and a bit of grit. 18. Tripe. To understand tripe is to understand the heart of 1970s cooking. It was all about using everything. Tripe, the stomach lining of a cow, wasn't for the faint of heart. Its chewy texture and distinct flavor meant it was loved by some, avoided by others. But for immigrant families, farming communities, and anyone who grew up in the tradition of nose-to-tail eating, tripe was sacred. In soups, stews, or braised for hours with onions and garlic, tripe took on the flavors of its surroundings. It fed a family when the butcher's premium cuts were too costly, and it reminded home cooks of a time when nothing went to waste, not a single scrap. Tripe may not have made it into the glossy cookbooks of the era, but it was there, in quiet, steamy kitchens filled with patience, purpose, and the kind of resourcefulness that's all too rare today. 17. Potato pancakes. There's something magical about turning leftovers into something new, and potato pancakes were that magic in edible form. Maybe they came from Sunday's mashed potatoes, maybe from boiled spuds that didn't get eaten. Add an egg, a bit of onion, some flour or breadcrumbs, and suddenly you had golden brown patties crisped to perfection in a cast iron skillet. They were breakfast, lunch, or dinner. They were topped with sour cream, applesauce, or just a sprinkle of salt. And they were made in homes that knew how to stretch a meal and waste nothing. Potato pancakes weren't just frugal. They were celebratory, a moment of joy born out of necessity. For many kids, they were the reason to look forward to leftovers. For parents, they were a reminder that you could always create something special with what you had. 16. Egg drop soup. Before egg drop soup became a staple in Chinese takeout orders, it was a revelation. In the 1970s, Chinese-American restaurants were on the rise, often family-run places with red vinyl booths, dragon wall art, and that unmistakable aroma of soy sauce, sesame oil, and ginger in the air. Egg drop soup was usually the first thing to hit the table. Clear broth, whisked egg ribbons, a dash of scallions, maybe a bit of white pepper. It was warmth in a bowl and a portal to something different. For many suburban families, it was their first taste of something exotic, a gateway to understanding other cultures through comfort food. And at home, parents would recreate it, often using chicken bouillon cubes and eggs, making it their own. It's simple, it's nourishing, and it holds the memory of a decade when America's culinary horizons began to expand, one ladle at a time. 15. Hogmaw. Of all the dishes that defined the grit and resourcefulness of the 1970s, hogmaw might be the most emblematic. Pig stomach, cleaned thoroughly, then stuffed with sausage, potatoes, onions, and spices, wasn't served at dinner parties. But in working-class households, especially in Pennsylvania Dutch country and Southern soul food traditions, it was a cherished meal. It took time, care, a willingness to embrace every part of the animal. And it fed a crowd. Families gathered to prepare it together, filling the kitchen with laughter, storytelling, and that unmistakable smell of something slow cooking its way to perfection. For kids, it might have looked strange, but they knew it tasted like home. In a time when nothing could be wasted, Hogmaw reminded America of the value in things others threw away, and the beauty in traditions that refused to disappear. 14. Fish head soup. It's not glamorous, but it was once gold in the pot. Fish head soup was a dish that spoke to the generations who fished not for sport, but for supper. In coastal towns and riverside communities, fish heads, especially from cod, snapper, or salmon, weren't waste. They were opportunity. Packed with collagen, fat, and flavor, they became the secret ingredient behind some of the richest, most comforting broths you could ladle into a bowl. In the 1970s, this dish lived in the kitchens of immigrant families from the Philippines, China, the Caribbean, and the Deep South, places where fish wasn't just food, it was identity. It bubbled away quietly on stoves while kids did homework and elders shelled peas or chopped greens. The aroma was strong, but the result was unforgettable. A deeply savory soup with tender bits of meat tucked around the cheeks and jaw, perfect with a hunk of bread or a scoop of rice. It wasn't just about thrift. It was about honoring the whole fish, the whole meal, and the whole tradition. 13. Oysters Rockefeller. Back in the 70s, when cocktail parties were glamorous and dinner guests dressed their best, Oysters Rockefeller was a showstopper, the kind of dish that whispered luxury the moment it hit the table. Named for the richest man in America, this New Orleans-born appetizer had just the right mix of mystery and class. The recipe? Still a secret, even over a century later. But what we do know is that it involved tender oysters resting in their half-shells, topped with a rich, velvety green mixture, spinach, butter, breadcrumbs, and just a kiss of anise liqueur, then broiled until bubbly and golden. The contrast of the creamy topping with the briny oyster beneath was unforgettable. In the 1970s, serving Oysters Rockefeller meant something. It meant you had style. Whether it was laid out as a starter for a dinner party or featured in the glossy pages of a women's magazine, this dish represented culinary sophistication. It wasn't just food, it was theater on a plate. 12. Creamed spinach. Creamed spinach may not sound exciting to today's crowd, but in the 1970s, it was the gateway vegetable, the one that got even picky kids to say, "Can I have seconds?" This dish took the humble green and gave it a creamy, luxurious makeover. Frozen spinach was boiled down until tender, then folded into a silky white sauce made with milk, butter, and just a touch of nutmeg. Some cooks would throw in a pinch of garlic powder or parmesan, giving it a savory kick. Served in steakhouses alongside a slab of beef or dished up at home next to pork chops, creamed spinach brought a flash of green to the table and a whole lot of iron to the plate. It was the vegetable dish that parents were proud to serve, and kids were surprisingly happy to eat. Back then, food wasn't about hiding vegetables, it was about finding a way to make them shine. And in that buttery, creamy glory, spinach found its moment. 11. Fried chicken livers. For many growing up in the rural stretches of America, fried chicken livers were more than just dinner, they were a ritual. In households where nothing went to waste, chicken livers were a treasured resource. Soaked in milk to mellow out their strong flavor, then tossed in seasoned flour and fried until golden, they offered a crispy outside and a soft, rich center that packed a protein punch. They were served at church picnics, wrapped in foil for school lunches, or laid out on paper towels during Sunday football games. A dash of hot sauce or a dollop of mustard was all you needed. Though today they've been nudged out by boneless wings and frozen tenders, fried chicken livers still hold a place in the hearts of those who remember their smell filling a grandmother's kitchen. They weren't fancy, but they were full of flavor and full of memories. 10. Shepherd's pie. Shepherd's pie wasn't about extravagance, it was about making the most of what you had. And in the 1970s America, that made it a star of the weeknight dinner rotation. Born from British roots but proudly adopted into American kitchens, this dish turned leftovers into something worth looking forward to. A base of leftover roast beef or ground meat mixed with canned peas, carrots, and a quick homemade gravy was topped with mashed potatoes and baked until golden at the edges. Every layer told a story. The bottom, a reminder of Sunday dinner. The top, a way to stretch last night's spuds. For many families, it was also the first introduction to casseroles, a genre of food that defined the 70s. It was cozy, it was hearty, and it smelled like home. Shepherd's pie was the ultimate example of doing a lot with a little and doing it deliciously. 9. Crown roast of lamb. If you ever sat at a formal dining table in the 1970s with a crisp tablecloth, flickering candles, and Frank Sinatra on the stereo, you might remember this one, the crown jewel of special occasion dinners. Crown roast of lamb was more than just a meal, it was an event. Racks of lamb were tied together into a circle, ribs pointing outward like a crown, the center filled with stuffing laced with herbs, garlic, and sometimes dried fruit. Foil-wrapped rib tips peeked out like tiny thrones. Roasted until perfectly browned, it arrived at the table to audible gasps, the centerpiece of many Easter and Christmas dinners. The fragrance of rosemary and thyme filled the room, mingling with the scent of fresh rolls and holiday excitement. It wasn't something you whipped up on a Tuesday. Crown roast was reserved for the days that mattered most, and it made those days unforgettable. 8. American cornmeal porridge. Long before smoothie bowls and overnight oats filled Instagram feeds, cornmeal porridge was a breakfast staple for the working class. Made with just cornmeal, milk, and water, it was thick, warm, and endlessly customizable. A sprinkle of cinnamon, a swirl of butter, or a handful of raisins could turn it from basic to beautiful. In Black and Caribbean American households, it was often flavored with nutmeg and sweetened condensed milk, transforming it into a soul-soothing morning ritual. Cornmeal was cheap, shelf-stable, and deeply nourishing. No surprise, then, that it fed generations. For many, it was the first warm meal they ever had. For others, it was the comfort food served after long church services or before school bus pickups in the dead of winter. It's one of those meals that whispers of home and of survival with dignity. 7. Sloppy Joes. Nothing quite says school lunch nostalgia like a sloppy Joe dripping off the edge of a sesame bun. Made from ground beef, tomato paste or ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, and a little brown sugar, the mixture was sweet, tangy, and oh so satisfying. Moms loved it because it was cheap. Cafeterias loved it because it was fast. And kids loved it because it felt like a hamburger, only messier and more fun. Whether scooped onto Wonder Bread or a crusty roll, the Sloppy Joe filled American plates and hands with saucy goodness. Some added bell peppers or onion, others kept it simple. Served with a side of potato chips and a chocolate milk carton, it defined a generation of lunches and weeknight dinners. And though today it might be passed over for cleaner, leaner fare, the Sloppy Joe is still a memory that makes mouths water and hearts warm. 6. Hoppin John. On New Year's Day in the South, Hoppin John was more than tradition, it was a promise. This dish, made from black-eyed peas, rice, and pork, usually bacon or ham hock, was eaten to bring good luck and prosperity in the year ahead. The peas symbolized coins, the greens often served beside them represented dollars, and the golden cornbread on the plate? Well, that was gold. But beyond superstition, Hoppin John was a perfect dish for stretching ingredients and feeding many. One pot could feed a crowd. It was inexpensive, filling, and incredibly flavorful. Onions, garlic, bay leaves, maybe a splash of vinegar or hot sauce to finish. In the 1970s, Hoppin John was a reminder of the African roots that nourished Southern cuisine. It brought families together, even as disco fever swept the nation. Some say its name came from children hopping around the table, eager to dig in. Others say it was a man named John who hopped as he sold peas and rice in Charleston. Either way, this dish is steeped in story and soul. 5. Pickle Sandwiches. There was a time, not all that long ago, when lunch wasn't Instagrammable. It was real. It was survival. And sometimes it was a pickle sandwich, 2 slices of bread, a few dill pickle chips, or maybe a spear split lengthwise. That was it. Maybe a swipe of mustard if the fridge wasn't completely bare. In the 1970s, a pickle sandwich wasn't diet food or some low-carb gimmick. It was the reality for many hard-working folks stretching every dollar they had. Pickles were cheap, just a few cents a jar, and they lasted forever. You could slap them between slices of Wonder Bread and call it lunch, and many did. Factory workers, janitors, cashiers, moms feeding 4 kids on one income. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical, and somehow it always hit the spot. Today, people might romanticize them, tossing in fancy pickled veggies and artisanal bread. But back then, pickle sandwiches were a quiet symbol of strength, a testament to making do without complaint. 4. Hot water. Cornbread. Before dinner rolls and boxed biscuits, hot water cornbread was king of the table, especially in the southern kitchens of the 1970s. It was born from necessity. Cornmeal, boiling water, a pinch of salt, and maybe a spoonful of sugar if you could spare it. Mixed until thick and shaped into patties, it was fried in lard or oil until golden and crisp on the outside, warm and tender inside. Hot water cornbread wasn't just a side, it was the soul of the meal. It sat proudly next to fried chicken or collard greens. It soaked up stews and gravy. It fed families from Mississippi to Memphis, becoming a staple in both black and white rural households alike. What it lacked in fluffiness, it made up for in heritage. This was the kind of food passed down in cast-iron skillets and shared with bare hands at dinner tables too small for the love they held. Every crunchy bite was a connection to generations before. 3. Cheesy ham and broccoli casserole. In the 1970s, casseroles were more than convenient. They were a canvas for creativity, and none stood out quite like the cheesy ham and broccoli casserole. Busy moms didn't have the luxury of multiple pots or hours of prep, so they leaned on canned soup, leftover ham, frozen broccoli, and cheese to bring dinner together. Topped with crushed crackers or buttered breadcrumbs, it was slid into the oven and emerged golden and bubbling, a one-dish wonder that fed a full family. This casserole wasn't just dinner, it was lunch tomorrow, maybe even breakfast the next day. It showed up at church potlucks, PTA meetings, and holiday tables. It was the dish you brought to new moms or grieving neighbors, and it never failed to deliver warmth and satisfaction. In a decade defined by ingenuity and thrift, cheesy ham and broccoli casserole became the friendly face of food that worked just as hard as the women who made it. 2. Fried chicken patties. By the time the 1980s rolled in, a new kind of comfort food had landed on the plastic trays of America's school cafeterias: fried chicken patties, made from ground chicken seasoned and shaped into discs, then breaded and fried to a crispy golden brown. These patties were the lunchroom answer to fast food cravings. For kids who rarely saw a drive-through, this was a close second. Served between soft buns or on their own with a side of corn and tater tots, chicken patties were hot, hearty, and downright beloved. Their smell drifted down school hallways, building anticipation like no pop quiz ever could. Behind the scenes, they were a cafeteria dream, easy to prep, easy to serve, and cheap to make. But to the kids who grew up on them, they were more than efficient. They were nostalgic. They remind us of chocolate milk cartons, plastic trays, and the thrill of a hot lunch ticket. And for a generation of Gen Xers, they'll always taste like simpler days. 1. Taco salad. Few dishes screamed retro potluck like taco salad. A brilliant blend of convenience, customization, and comfort, taco salad brought together the best of Tex-Mex flavor and suburban creativity. It usually started with a bed of iceberg lettuce, crisp and crunchy, topped with seasoned ground beef, shredded cheddar, diced tomatoes, black olives, and a generous dollop of sour cream. Crushed tortilla chips or a crispy taco shell bowl added the perfect crunch. In the 1970s and 80s, taco salad was a revelation. It looked festive, felt fun, and gave everyone a way to build their own plate. No two servings were ever the same, and that was the beauty of it. It wasn't authentic Mexican cuisine, but it was pure Americana. It reflected a growing curiosity with ethnic foods, softened through cheese and ranch dressing to suit the average family's palate. From backyard cookouts to Tupperware parties, taco salad was the unofficial mascot of good times. It's a dish that bridged the gap between old-school casseroles and the bold flavors of the future. Those were 25 forgotten dinners from the 1970s, simple, hearty, and full of history. Which one sparked a memory for you? Drop a comment, hit like, and don't forget to subscribe for more delicious trips down memory lane. See you in the next one.